All right, so I think everyone heard that. So we are officially recording this time. This is actually this conversation is actually a redo. We had a really, I swear it was a really great conversation. We probably cannot, in fact, it was so good, we probably cannot match the quality of the conversation that we had that we forgot to record. But Michael and Shari are here again as we continue to kind of dive into this strange little book on the Apocalypse of St. John by Shari. You're the one with the great German pronunciation there. I'll let you say the name of the author.
By Emil Bock.
See, there we go, because I butcher it every single time. So thank you, Shari. And we've made it up to chapter 6, or excuse me, chapter 5. This is our 6th conversation, because our first conversation really was just on the forward and introduction. So this is our 6th conversation on chapter 5 of the book, and this chapter is about the trumpet. So the last chapter we covered the seals. The title of this chapter is the first trumpet, cosmic storm, the 8th and 9th chapters. So the 8th and 9th chapters refers to Revelation chapter 8 and 9. So that's like the subject matter of this section. And then I'll just kind of open it up to see where if someone has a particular spot they'd like to dive right in, where we can get going. I'm open to wherever.
I just want to say, first of all, I've said this multiple times, but just really recommend reading this book for anybody that's interested in the book of Revelation, because it's it's unlike any other take I've seen in this. And I'm sure there's something like this has to exist somewhere, like in the Ancient Fathers commentary, but I've never seen a book that actually looks at the symbolism in a real deep way. Like everything kind of, again, tries to map it to certain geopolitical situations or certain theories about, this country is represented by this like it's very kind of like, and it never is satisfying. It always, and
it's a very Apocalypse Now kind of reading of the book, where it's like the focus is on like the cyclical nature of the symbols, like how like these can be read into any time.
Yeah,
and that they're not. So
speaking of which, we were talking about church fathers right before we got on. Does anybody know of any church fathers?
I was just going to say there is one, and I can't remember his name, who did it, and I think it's the only one who did a commentary. But there is a bit of a history in the church. So now I want to get this right. I think there was a bit of like a squabble about Hebrews and Revelation.
Right, about even making it into the canon.
Yeah,
right.
Like the Orthodox Church wanted Hebrews, and the Catholic Church, Rome, wanted Revelation. And so
that's why they made it in
Hebrews, they let Revelation in.
But they weren't split at that time. I guess you see just the fathers, or the what were they called back then? The bishops of the East were.
Yeah, the bishops. Yeah, and they were the head honchos, right? I mean, there was also the Bishop of Rome, and he was asking for revelation. And the reason for that is because the Orthodox Church is modeled after Revelation. Mm-hmm. So it wasn't something that they wanted, like I don't know a whole lot about this, but they don't also want you to read the Gospel of John until you are catechized into the church, right? Mm-hmm. So these are mystical books. And they're very particular about how those books are read or handled by the everyday person. And I think for that reason, the
Jews have that sort of thinking with certain books as well in the Old Testament, specifically Ezekiel and the Song of Solomon are supposed to be books you shouldn't read. You've gotten to a certain age and have had like certain life experiences.
Well, and you need a spiritual father, right, to help you through those things. So. Yeah. Anyway,
so I actually looked it up while we're talking about here, just to see, and there is actually very little written by the church fathers on the apocalypse. Irenaeus apparently wrote, but it's just a very small section. It looks like it's only 5 lines of text. Mm-hmm. And then Justin Martyr a tiny bit. It looks like Eusebius wrote the most.
But there is one one
it.
guy, and I don't know if he's a father, but there's one guy that I don't know even what century, I can't remember. But if I find it, I'll let you guys know.
And then
he wrote a commentary.
Augustine has a section in Civitas Dei, and Origen actually on First Principles. There is a section where he talks about the spiritual versus the physical pleasures in the New Jerusalem, but that's not really, doesn't really, there's not any, there may be one that exists, but just a cursory look like kind of supported your notion that for whatever reason that wasn't really, the book wasn't really tackled much by the early church fathers. And I think there's a reason for that. And I think that is that the early church was very much living in an immediate expectation of the eschaton. So it wasn't like the need to like wrestle with this book and figure out what it meant wasn't as pressing. That's one possibility. The other possibility is they didn't think it is that they were close enough to the tradition of Hebrew apocalyptic literature that they may have what seems what the symbolism that seems obscure to us may have been obvious to them, and they didn't think it needed commentary. So that's that. Those are a couple possible explanations.
Okay, so the thing I'm talking about is called the Scholia in Apocalypsum. It was recently discovered.
Okay.
And it was attributed to Origen, but it's not.
It's not actually Origen.
Falsely ascribed to Origen, and it's a I mean, I can't remember, so I'm kind of skimming through this article here, but it was some monk somewhere. But anyway, if you look up school, and I tried to find a copy of it, because it was translated, and I can't find a copy of it anywhere, which is kind of interesting.
You said Scholia Apocalyptica?
Scholia in Apocalypsum.
I see something on, it's like $80 on.
Oh, you found it? Well, maybe
well, this is
it's
translated by somebody with a Greek sounding name, so I assume it's somebody from an Eastern background. It calls it Ancient Commentary on the Book of Revelation.
Yeah, that's the book, but it's not actually, it's his commentary. That's that Samalikos guy. Yeah, but it's not the book itself. Like, not just the text, it's his commentary on the text. Maybe it's all in there.
It's all in there. So this is a new critical edition with translation and commentary of the Scholia in Apocalypsum, which was falsely attributed to Origen a century ago. These comments include extensive sections from Didymus, the Blind's lost commentary on the Apocalypse from the 4th century, and therefore counter the prevailing belief that I can't even read this, something 6th century commentary was the most ancient. Professor, I can't read his name, argues that their author was in fact Cassian the Sabbasite, an erudite monk and abbot in the monastery of Sabbas, the Great Laura in Palestine.
So yeah, that establishes that was useful because it establishes what we were saying. Like, there really is just no, except for maybe potentially this, there really just is no early commentary.
No.
On this text.
No.
I mean, all the church fathers that I was reading off, they only just barely touch on it in passing. It's not, there's no full analysis in any of those.
Yeah.
So,
There's also, I just discovered a book by D.H. Lawrence on the Apocalypse.
I saw that.
I want to order.
I saw you post something about that.
One of Sergei Bulgakov's last works was also on the Apocalypse of John, which I've still been looking for a reasonably priced hard copy of. Yeah. But I'm trying to, it's a full commentary by Bulgakov, and if I can find a copy for less than $50, I'll probably. I just hate paying $50 for a paperback. It just feels like, especially for like a used paperback, it's like $50 for a used paperback. You got to be kidding me. I saw, you know what though? I was, you know what it costs for a hardback copy of David Bentley Hart's Beauty of the Infinite now? It's like almost $800.
What?
Jeez.
You can still get it for $32 in paperback, but like on Amazon, like the hardback copies of Beauty of the Infinite are almost $800. I guess they're collector's items now.
I guess they're just not making them anymore.
Yeah, it's out. Yeah, I think it's out of print for sure. So that's why. Yeah, so it's limited supply and demand thing. So is there any particular? So we do have this commentary. Oh no, also yeah, Michael, you're recommending people to read it. It's free. It's available on PDF online. It's public domain. You can freely download it, and then also I've been putting my audio recordings up on the channel, so
Yeah,
you can just listen to the audio recordings. Basically, before we actually discuss the chapter, I do an audio recording of the chapter that we're going to discuss. So all the chapters that we have discussed to date, including the one we're about to discuss, are the audio recording is available. So what jumped out to either of you in this chapter in Emil Bock's, did I get it right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Analysis.
There was one bit where it talks about the polarity of book and altar.
Yeah.
Points to the basic order of all spiritual life, which I thought that seemed very interesting to me, because it seems like, prior to the Protestant Reformation, the Catholic Church was really, there was this dominance of ritual, at least for your common everyday sort of religious adherent. That was what spiritual life was for them, was this ongoing ritual. And the number of people that even had access to the book was very very rare. And now it's like, it seems like we have an inversion of that post Reformation, where the book becomes everything, and the ritual kind of diminishes to the point where it feels like it's almost completely lost to most of what of the world that calls themselves Christian.
That's interesting. What do you, yeah, why do you think he uses the term polarity there?
I think he's definitely influenced by maybe Barfield's idea of polarity, which also probably came from Steiner as well.
Since he's right, since he's a Steiner associated figure, that seems likely to me. That he's like suggesting kind of like
right, with polarity indicating that these two things are necessary for each other's existence, but they also kind of compete with one another at the same time.
Right. How do you think that, like, that's interesting? And he also
do they actually, well,
go ahead.
Does he think that they compete?
Well, it's,
or is he just talking about the duality of it?
Well, I think he is saying that they,
okay,
that they well, that's my understanding of a polarity, even coming from Barfield, because like I've been going deep into this with language, and Karen and I are talking about that Speaker's Meaning book, and part of what we're talking about there is the duality between, or the polarity rather, between communication and expression, where communication is all about the accuracy of what's being said. The expression is more like the fullness or the kind of ineffable qualities of the personal that you're trying to get across. And so in some sense, you can't have one without the other, right? And he gives examples like, here's an example of like full expression with zero or low communication would be something like a poet that has lived a really interesting life, has all these great observations, but somehow he's a bad poet such that nobody's able to read his poetry and come away with that, what he's trying to get across, right? So there you have lots of expression, but there's no accuracy in the communication. But he was just making the point that in some sense those things are always competing with each other, whereas like 100% accuracy with like zero expression would be something like essentially like the communication of a Cartesian coordinates on like where this boat sits in the middle of the ocean, right? That would be like maximum accuracy, but no expression. but in those things, two things are kind of playing off each other all the time. Like he called them like sweet enemies, like where one is playing against the other. And I think that same sort of
Our book
relationship
and
exists.
are you suggesting that book and altar are have a correspondence with the accuracy and expression polarity? And if that's the case, I would say
I wouldn't map them onto
like,
each other, but I think they have a relationship that's similar, where emphasizing one necessarily kind of detracts from the other.
Yes, I agree.
Potentially. And probably the right relationship would be some balance of the two. But for whatever reason, especially in the current age where we're all about efficiency and we're all about kind of simplifying, we tend to pick, it's got to be either this or that.
Well,
we have these
in the Orthodox.
Well, also, I mean, the other thing about if it's a polarity, it's like if it's a polarity, that means that that means there has to be a balanced relationship with it too, because if you're like all about the book, right, then you're not seeing it as a polarity. You're just like you're just pursuing the book as a singularity.
Right. It actually diminishes the book. Like he says later, I
Right.
actually wrote this down. A fundamentalist clinging to the letter is in danger of eclipsing the heavenly book, because in some sense, the book, it is a pointer back to this heavenly book that's being referenced in the apocalypse, right?
Right. And he says like basically like all the books are like reference back or are a reference to the heavenly book. And he says that all the altars are a reference to the heavenly altar. Yes. He also says, what is it? I think he says something to the effect. He says something that like if you he says something about the Bible properly understood as the book. And at the same time that he's talking about that there must be books on earth as well as in heaven, he actually talks about it as like being like a key to understanding all other literature. Yes, he does right here. I'll read that section. Bible, both in Greek and Latin, means the book. The biblical scriptures, rightly understood, are in reality not written like other books or documents, but are a transparent, near to heaven reproduction of the book in heaven. But the vital impact of the Bible depends on our capacity to sense through the verbal text, written as it is in an earthly language, and still more secularized and obscured by translations, the heavenly word of God. A fundamentalist clinging to the letter is in serious danger of eclipsing the heavenly book, which is the part you were talking about, Michael. The unique position of the book of books cannot be secured simply by dogmatic claims. But if the indwelling spirit word is kept alive, it can work like a leaven for all other literature. So that's interesting because it's like, it's suggesting that like, it's suggesting this idea of like Christ as the key, like at a much broader scale. It's not like just like Christ, which makes me think, Shari, before you were talking about Origin referencing like the seals.
Yeah.
And Christ is like that. Do you want to go ahead and talk about that a little bit? Because I want to pursue this thread for a minute, because I think that like, and I want to connect this back to this idea here about the heavenly book and like Christ as basically, I would say, the key to understanding all things.
Right. So I'm just going to read this really quick out of this book, okay? Because Origin is really after literal readings of scripture a lot. And it says here, Origin says that the book is composed of three parts: body, soul, and spirit, just as scripture is given by God for the salvation of men. And in a homily on Leviticus, the divine scriptures have three senses: historical, moral, and mystical. So we say that they have a body, a soul, and a spirit. What could be more natural, besides the general taste for correspondences that was so lively during that period, and which St. Augustine would still display on many occasions? Origin here transposes the analogy of microcosm and macrocosm, a commonplace of ancient thought. from man to scripture, which he will tell us is like another universe. And there's a ton of things in here that I could send you guys about this. But so Origen believed that, that in Revelation, the only one who could open the book was Christ, because he's talking about the scriptures, the Hebrew scriptures, and Christ is revealed and reveals what's happening in the book, right? And he talks about Christ as being the revealer, and he says that because Christ is the image, right, of the invisible God. And so as an image, he's unveiling something you can see, right?
Yeah, right. That makes me think of like Jordan Peterson in the conversation I had with John Vervaeke. He said something that was really interesting to me, because it's like he is like, I don't know if he's aware of that of this as a conscious motion, but at least subconsciously, he seems to me to be like on the heels of chasing down a Trinitarian ontology, because he says first that reality most properly manifests itself. I don't remember the exact wording, but reality manifests itself as love. There was some qualifying term in there, but that was like the point that he was driving at. And then he also said that truth is the servant of reality. And to me, that's like, that's the father-son dynamic of the Trinity right there.
Well, what's kind of interesting about what Origen talks about here in regards to reading the scriptures, he gives them a body, soul, and a spirit, right?
Right.
And so they're actually living. Like the scriptures are a person, which
right.
we say they are, right? Christ is the word of God. And so I wanted to say earlier that, like in the Orthodox Church, the Bible or the Gospels are on the altar.
Right, but this idea, if we're going to take like the
The
idea
book.
of like right, but if we're going to try to take the idea of a Trinitarian ontology seriously, like starting to think, if person and relation are actually like the ground of being, then we should expect to see those patterns everywhere. And we should
and we
begin
should
to see
also
them in all things.
we should expect to see the boundaries of persons outside of what we traditionally think of as
That's
the
right.
person. Like, for instance, there's aspects of all our personhoods in this conversation, and then there's real aspects of Christ's person in the book, and there's, in some sense, what this also speaks to me is like the way that personhood is distributed in some sense is always through love. There's always this kind of self-sacrificial thing, which, as you pointed out, Nate, is kind of like, it's kind of the power that underpins all
I
things.
just want to interrupt you really quick. There's something really, you said something really powerful there, because you said there's the self-sacrificial thing. So we started talking about the book, and then as you were talking, you like came to this moment as you were talking where you saw the need for it to reference back to the altar. So so it's like in as you were talking, you showed that polarity of book and altar that we began talking about, like right there, right in the way you talked about it. But please continue your thought. I just wanted to point that out really quickly, because it was pretty amazing, actually.
Yeah.
But that's where you went.
Well, I just think it's this weird thing, like where there's bits of you that get distributed everywhere, and the more of you becomes distributed in the world, the more you are willing to self-sacrifice. And in some sense, this is the way Christ colonizes the whole world, right? Like, he doesn't have any genetic offspring, and yet there's pieces of him that are so thoroughly sown in.
And if we were to imitate Christ,
we would do the same.
That's right. Exactly. Right. So rather than trying to hold on to ourself for ourselves, we would want to
Well, I'm going to go to my.
But we can't. But
analogy.
here's the thing, though. You can actually only do that operation with a mode of being that has already been transformed. Because if you try to do that with a mode of being that is defined on your own terms and your own self-identification, you're talking about something that's literally impossible.
No,
like
so
you cannot do it because you would be destroyed in the process of attempting it.
Well, this is why I want to talk about the cup now, because you talk about imitating Christ, and I don't like that language, because I find it gives people the idea that they can actually do that, and you just said
right
that they can't, right?
Well, no, you can't. No, it can't become. It has to be a transformation, not a mere imitation.
Well, it's a transforming or a conforming, right?
Like conforming.
This is why I say.
But it's also got to be done communally, right? Because like in some sense, I think you're right. You're like, we can't. There's this great line in the book of Ephesians. I think it's chapter 4, where it talks about the body finally coming. Talking about the church, the body finally coming into the full stature of Christ. But it's not like any individual that kind of finally, mans up and emulates Christ. It's the body itself. So there's this corporate thing that comes, it's the Voltron thing, where it's a coming together, and in collectively it happens, rather than any one individual.
Well, like when Verbeke talked about reaching for the cup and conforming to the cup, or wrestling, because when in that Peterson-Verbeke conversation, I found that really intriguing, because when you are reaching for a cup, like literally, like I'm reaching for my cup and I am becoming conformed to the cup. Like I don't even have to look at the cup, right?
Right.
I conform to it. I don't have to focus on it. I don't have to think about it. All I have to do is reach for it, right? I just have to have that motion of wanting it, desiring the cup, right?
And you kind of become at one with it, right? Because like you said, you don't even think about it anymore. It's now an extension of you.
Right. Right. And so like, what is emulating or imitating Christ? What is that? Well, I think that
it's vision and action, if what you're saying is right.
It's all it necessitates is reaching for, right? It's like Peterson talks about wishing on the star, right?
But you can't reach for something if you don't see it. And then there's the action of reaching. So there's like so what it involves is vision and action. It certainly doesn't involve propositional knowing.
No.
That's for sure.
And it's completely subconscious. It's not something that you, like, if I think about the cup and reaching for the cup, I can miss it. I can knock it over. I can do lots of things. But if I don't think about the cup, look, there it is.
Well, and this is like, and this, what I'm going to say is going to be in reference to Aquinas, but this would really apply to all of the Eastern Church Fathers too. For like Aquinas, it's like nature is good. It's just like it's a matter of it's a matter of degrees of goodness and becoming better. And like doing, and it's not, and which is why propositions are really an interference, because if you're doing something because you think it's the right thing, that in and of itself is not enough.
Well, for
you
me,
you have to do the good because your nature has been conformed to it.
That whole example is the altar in the book. Okay.
Yep.
This is the altar. This is the temple, and this is the book. Right. And they are perfectly integrated with each other. And I reach the cup. Right. And so it's like, it's not even a both and this is why it's so fascinating to read Origen when he talks about the book itself is a body, a soul, and a spirit, right? I am a body, a soul, and a spirit. The
Well, and
book is a
also
body, a soul, and a spirit.
we should bring, since
Well,
you mentioned the word temple, we should mention that Bock actually lays out. It's not just the book and the altar. So he has he has the book,
yeah.
the altar, and the temple, right? So
Right.
he has
But that's where the temple. That's where the altar
Right.
is found in the temple.
And symbolically, he's saying that the book is related to this, to the seals, right? To the cycle of the 7 seals. The altar is like related to the trumpets, because you see the altar come into the scene before the trumpet blasts. And at the right before the first trumpet goes off, like the altar has come fully into vision, and the strong angel takes the fire from the altar and catches it in the censer and hurls it to the earth. And then the vials, and he doesn't actually get into that because it's probably in the next chapter, but he does suggest that the vials are associated with the temple.
Mhm.
Now we have to go back to what he had said earlier in the book, where he talks about like the spiritual senses, right? So it's like, so the seals are related to the images of the imagination, which is like the spiritual sense of sight. The trumpets to inspiration, which is like the spiritual sense of sound or hearing. And then the vials are related to the intuition, which is a spiritual, what does he call it? He calls it a spiritual dimension of the sense. I don't think he uses the word dimension.
Okay, so can you say that again?
Spiritual octave. He says a spiritual octave of the sense of touch is the language he uses for describing the intuition, which that was the one when we talked about it, I kind of struggled with, like, how is that the case? But then I thought about how we talk about our intuition, like the kinds of words we use when we try to describe our intuitions, like I just had this feeling.
That is definitely body, soul, and spirit again, Nate.
Exactly. That's exactly right.
Because origins, okay, so in here it says here the reason for this threefold mystery, Origin says, is spread throughout the scriptures. Did not the patriarch Isaac dig 3 wells? Does not wisdom advise us to write her teachings 3 times in our hearts? The same is true for his tripartite anthropology. It too he discovers in many a sacred text. It seems to him to be taught by the book of wisdom and implied by the prophet Ezekiel when he reproaches Jerusalem for a 3-fold fornication. He reads also in St. Matthew and in St. Luke. The 3 measures of flour in the gospel parable also seem to signify it. He thinks it is not unintentional that St. John says of Jesus, he was troubled in spirit, although Jesus himself said, my soul is troubled. Mm-hmm. He finds the same doctrine in St. Paul, this time without ever having had to put it there, in speaking of the combat between the flesh and the spirit. And finally, does he not say as clearly as possible in his first letter to the Thessalonians, may your spirit and soul and body be kept sound and blameless? In brief, Origen concludes throughout the scripture, there is a difference between the soul and the spirit, but these details are secondary. So anyway, like Origen, the reason Origen develops this way of reading the scriptures is because he says the scriptures demand to be read this way, you know, right. as a body, a soul, and a spirit. So the body for him is literal,
right,
historical, and he doesn't say that it isn't important, right? So, but you know, if you think about that, if you think about that the word, the book is a body, soul, and spirit, and the Lamb slain before the foundation of the world comes and opens the book, right? He fills it, like Jesus said, I've come to fill full, right? Like it's like the dry bones, the valley right. of the dry bones, you know? Anyway, I'm just on tangent.
No, it's not a tangent at all. I think, I think it's very much like you're still talking about how to understand like this concept of the book, and we're talking about it like we're not talking about it, and we're talking about it in a mode like where Bock is talking about, like, you know.
Yeah, but
like
you were also meant the reason I said that. The reason
ahead.
I said that, sorry, Nate. The reason I said that though is because even the trumpets and the vials and the seals are representative of those 3 things.
That's right. Yeah.
So that's very interesting, I think.
Yes, they are, because he, like, So it's kind of like, it has something to do with like, I would say because he talks about them as spirit. Okay. Bock doesn't say this, but I think this would follow from what he's saying. I think this is right. So he's tying, he's, this is kind of combining a few different things he said. So he ties the seals and the trumpets and the vials to the spiritual senses, right? And they happen in cycles of 7, which have to do with like the fullness of time and like the evolutionary process of becoming that we are going through. And like at this at 7 is like the completing point, the fullness of that, right? So it's like, and since those represent our spiritual senses, it represents us coming into like us make it's it what ultimately this book is talking about is the things we must pass through in coming into the fullness of our spiritual being,
which is our own
which is full possession of that spiritual body, which is associated, body is associated with touch, I would say. So body,
but the
soul, and spirit.
Yeah, the complete body though is all those 3 things completely.
Correct.
Right. So
absolutely,
you're actually traveling.
Well, because it's not done. This is why it's not. This is why it's not done until that. This is why the end doesn't come until all the cycles have passed.
Right. Right.
We have to go through. We have to go through the cycles of 7 of all 3 things. It would also suggest a sequence. It would suggest that our spiritual bodies are the last thing to be completed.
Yes.
Which seems right.
Which seems very right. Yeah. But right. It's like it's again, it's so similar to Harding, where you're making this inward journey, right, into your own microcosm of all of that, right? The body, the soul, and the spirit, right? But you're also making that it's also at the same time simultaneously an outward journey.
And taking it that way in light of what he's saying about how, like, yes, these reply to the eschaton for sure, but they also they're also now. You know, they also apply to all times, and they can apply to like any time in a particular way. In fact, there's a section in this chapter where he talks about like how he sees like the cycles of the trumpets, like as they've worked out in sort of a mini cycle starting in the 15th century to
but it's a mirror
the time that he was writing, which was just after World War II. And he's like, it's a mini version, but basically he's saying you can do this at any level. Right. I think, and I'm suggesting you could do it at the scale of in an individual life.
Yes, because it's a mirror image. Whatever is happening in heaven is happening on earth.
Right.
But not just like the ball.
And what happens in heaven doesn't happen and all of these things are happening in heaven, and therefore it's obvious that they can't be happening. They can't be happening in time, but yeah, they're happening at all times because they're heavenly events.
Yeah, that's a good question. Like how should we conceptualize where heaven is? I mean,
right? It's not a place, right? Exactly.
Is it better? It's not is it better to see it as something that's kind of mapped on to our reality in some sense? Like it's or it's either you could think of it as something that is above that maps onto us, or something that's below that supports us.
Well, it's the same thing. Like, so Jesus said the kingdom of heaven is within you, right? So that's why Harding's work is so interesting to me, because it is that mirror image, right, of this outward, this cosmic thing that's happening, and he maps it out in a very tangible, like scientific, stars and sun and everything, right? But they're all orbiting around in here at the same time, right?
Right.
It's all it's a mirror image, right? So
right. Well, yeah, but also the useful thing about Harding is like Harding talks about it in terms of this idea of a hierarchical ascent. Right. So it's like, I don't think so. Heaven is not it's not like heaven isn't really separate. It's
No.
like I suppose that like I suppose that like kind of like the scientific idea of dimensions is not a bad way of conceiving it.
Well, you could think of us as the mediator, right? So the link between heaven and
Right. And we're sort of like, yeah, and we're kind of like in the right. And how but yeah. And then hell would also be conceived in the same way, right? So if it's like if like reality is like kind of like a layered cake, you know, with hell at the bottom and like earth in the middle and like heaven at the top, but it doesn't represent, none of this represents any physical in any physical space per se. It's just um
just all in your head, Nate.
it's just all my okay. Oh.
I'm
Okay,
just kidding.
thank you. Well, thank you, Lawrence. Oh, Lawrence Krauss did say that was all an illusion. But what was, and the interesting thing is he said, and he said it, well, the other thing that he said is like, he said it's all happening in a moment too. But it's interesting to me that like he doesn't understand, like there's always been a, like, if he had any symbolic thinking of it in him at all, that would immediately say something to him, because there's always been like symbolically a connection between the moment and eternity.
Are you talking about Lawrence Krauss or
Yeah,
Emil?
yeah, the Lawrence
Oh,
Krauss.
I didn't
Yeah.
watch that one. But you know, like when I was talking to Cal,
I've only watched like a little snippet that Karen shared with me, that and that Paul talked about in his video today.
you know, based on this book, um, you know, he said, Emil Bock says that, you know, what's going on in the book of Revelation is a cosmic view of creation, right?
Right.
So if you affirm that, then the Bible is the beginning and the beginning, not the
Right.
beginning and the end, right?
Right.
So if you have something that has a beginning and a beginning, everything in between is now. Think about that. Like,
right.
you know,
Yeah.
like that blows me away, right? Because
Right.
that is precisely what Jesus is always saying. Today, right? Today.
Right. Today. Yeah.
Now. Because
Right.
we're you know, this canon, this revelation of God is it's couched in two beginnings.
Right. There's a part in
So-
there's a part in Screw Tape Letters where um uh Uncle Wormwood like gives advice to have the patient like think about like the past or the future as much as possible, to throw the patient out of the moment. And he's like, of the two, it's like the past is like, there's more good can come out of looking into the past. So if you can, in as much as possible, get him looking toward the future.
Yeah.
And that's the, yeah, right. So and I would say that like, I think that our kind of like material myth of progress that dominates our culture is kind of like,
future oriented.
yeah, it's completely future oriented.
Yeah.
And it's like, it's so afraid of death that it doesn't ever like, that no one ever lives. I mean,
It's true.
I'm sorry. I mean, if your life is like, if your life is defined by like being a consumer and chasing status, that is not living. That isn't like,
I mean, even
that
psychology
is in
knows,
fact being dead.
even psychology knows that you don't live unless you live in the moment, right?
Right.
You're not alive.
Right.
You're projecting yourself into
Which also suggests that that move of reading this text as being about the future and
right.
always looking for what's coming in the future, that there's something genuinely spiritually unhealthy about that. Like that is
Deceptive.
deceptively so. Yeah, right. And it's like, and I think it's really caught up, like I think it's really I think that's a cause that's really caused by like, well, this isn't something like, you don't see this like in, you know, earlier times in church history. It's really kind of like
Modern.
like, right. So what, like the rapture was not a concept that existed in Christianity before about 1840.
Which
Right.
is why
So
I
it's
think
very,
Michael's encouraging people to read this, because, you know, the more I think
it's
about it,
for you now. That's the
well,
reason to read it.
but also, you know, for let's say the early church fathers, when they read Revelation, they had a much greater understanding of it because they knew what the symbolism meant. We don't know what that symbolism means, and so we try to interpret it in light of current events, right? And we project ourselves into a future and think of it as future oriented, because that's how we are. We're future oriented. So this is telling us something about our future.
I heard
and it isn't not like, if two double.
I heard Pajot say something hesitant. He said something once hesitantly in an answer to a Q&A, and I didn't quite understand his hesitance. He should have been a little bit more bold about it, because I think it's fundamentally, obviously right, where he said the saints are already in the eschaton.
Yeah.
Like, and like, but now is
It's so hard
like,
to unpack.
What do you think he means by that?
well, I think that I think he's just taking like, I think he's like taking the standpoint of eternity and the separation between being and becoming seriously. Like where else would the saints be? But entering like, and I would say not only, and I would go one step further in that we're already there and just don't know it.
Well, I mean, if you read it the way Bock lays it out, yeah, absolutely. I mean, the way Bock lays it out, the eschaton began in the garden.
That's why I'm interesting. Like you said, like was that before we started recording? One of you had mentioned like what's the guy's name who does the interviews, but he was interviewing somebody who
on the
topic of
the non-dual guy,
right, who says we have forgotten that we are gods.
Yeah.
Right. So like, I mean, there I kind of have to say that like there's a level at which that's true.
Yeah.
Because like, I would say, here's what, okay, so I'm going to tie this into the Krauss business about illusion. So I would say that time is the illusion, is an illusion created by the fall. So we need it in order to, we need it in order to work out our becoming process, because time is the only place where becoming can happen, because otherwise there's no change. Right. So, and in fact, that might be, this actually interprets the fall as a mercy, right? Because if Adam rebels against God and creation doesn't fall into time and change and becoming, then he would be separated from God forever.
He can't be redeemed. Okay, so this is an idea I've had for many years. Okay.
Right.
That I never dared to say.
I'm good at making people say the crazy stuff that they don't want to say.
But
that's because I'll say the crazy stuff first, so I make other people more comfortable.
Yeah, and I don't even know if I can really articulate it very well, but it's exactly that. It's exactly that, Nate. It's like, well, it's because of the angels, okay? So you have these immortal beings, and some of them fall, and they are continuous. They never die, right? They're immortal, like they live forever, and God has to redeem it because He loves, okay? Not because He needs to. He's not cleaning His room. He loves, okay? And so He creates mankind. But I would say that the fall is not where where we fall into time, but creation is where we fall into time. It's the arena in which this has to happen, because God made the first day and he called the light day, and right. So there's the instantiation of time. And then so now he has this arena, and he creates us. And that creation, it culminates in Christ, because he's the first Adam, the firstborn of all creation. And he says, it is finished, right? And that is the pathway to saving everything. It's the ultimate reconciliation of all things, including those beings who fell, who are immortal, right? And that's
Right.
why the angels look, and
the icon in the icon of the descent into hell, Christ is raising up Adam and Eve, right?
Right.
So if Christ is if you I mean, unless you actually think that Adam and Eve are like only like represent particular persons in a particular moment of time, then it's pretty obvious what that is.
Well,
it isn't. It's an icon of it's an icon of the restoration of all things.
Right. Like, this is for me why when I encountered universalism, I just embraced it, because this was what the picture that I had, that I put together a long time ago, and I just didn't know how to say it to anybody, right? But it's like I approached Jess with it. Actually, it was the first person I ever told, and I'm just like, it's because of the angels, Jess. And he was like, because anyway, I don't want to harp on it, because
no. So what you're saying is that, like, because the angels were created the angels were created as like in a state of in a changeless state. Is that what you're suggesting?
Because because they are immortal, and they are some of them are fallen, and God loves because unto purity, right? What it doesn't deem lovely, it makes more lovely. That's how God is. He doesn't condemn the unlovely, he makes it more lovely. And so how does he do that for those fallen angels?
Now this is definitely us now, I will say, and not
Bock.
not Emil Bock, because he actually seems to think that, like, basically, like, there are people who were just like just double down on materiality.
Like you read in many places that man is a mediator between heaven and earth, and that the angels look upon mankind and with amazement, right? Because why? What is so amazing? What is so amazing? Why is this all happening?
Well, this actually ties us back to, like, to the earlier chapter in the Lamb of God, and that the Lamb of God chapter, and that, like, that pause where the question is asked, like, how can it be done, right? Exactly. So it's like,
and it's not it as in, oh, how do we save all those little sinners down there that are kicking and fighting and biting each other, pulling each other's hair? No, it's how do we make this, how do we reconcile all these things together, right? All of it.
Well, I also think it's like, how is evolution and change even possible? Like, until God through his son initiates the possibility, it's not like if change is possible. This is the irony. So the concept of change has to come out of, I don't really like the mind of God language, but it has to come out of the, let's say, the mind or the nature of the unchanging.
But it has to come out of, it has to come with some self-sacrifice from whatever.
Exactly, because and what I think, this is, Michael, where this is where I think, and I'm thinking in this moment right now, this is where I'm thinking process theology might have a point, because in where because you have to, like, if you think seriously about like, um where's my sorry about that. I like had something come up on my screen and lost my,
train of thought. Process theology you were talking about.
yeah, okay, sorry about that. Yeah, so process theology, like I never saw this, like this is just coming out like in this conversation. So because I've always like wanted to keep that bright line between being and becoming, because, well, frankly, you can't explain the universe otherwise. But so I still think that like there has to be some part of God that remains unchanging. So that's where I think process theology is wrong. However, it definitely suggests that, like, since the idea of change has to somehow come out of the unchanging, which is why you have
Yeah, I
like the
think the
heavenly
unchanging
court
element
saying
is
how can this be? Because like there's no like, how can change come out of the unchanging? How can this be? And then what happens? What this is why I know that, oh my gosh, Book has to be right about the meaning of the image of the lamb, because the lamb shows them the possibility, because he's at first it's the lion, but then it changes before their eyes into the form of the lamb slain.
Yeah. And what,
Showing change is a thing that can happen.
but not only
And
that, Nate,
then,
not only that, the lion is fierce. The lion is a predator. The
right.
lion will destroy you, but the
Yeah,
lamb does
it
not.
changed. Right. Exactly. So it's like, oh my goodness. Like that's like, yeah, I mean, it's like I had an intuition that it was right before, but that really like that's really powerful. Like, um and there has to be something right about that. Like, because like the
so.
possibility of change has to come from somewhere.
What if what is preserved and unchanging about the absolute is in some sense this non-identical repetition, where you have something that is preserved, but there is this something, there is real change brought into being. This is like where I kept saying or wanting to say in my conversation with Karen about, I feel like I have this intuition that in some sense we don't really understand the lengths to which God's put all his chips on the table. And in some sense, like in this, what it stood out to me in reading Emil Bock, where he says God trusts man.
Mm.
Where and that's what I was talking about too, Nate, where there's kind of almost like this flip in contingency where we are somehow necessary to putting this story back the way it's going to go. And in some sense, God is,
Well, because it's through man that God himself, I mean, process theology might have this right, because like if you take if you're a serious Trinitarian, right? Like the moment that like the moment that the moment that God, like the Logos, the Son of God, begins to develop in the womb of Mary, like that is God submitting himself to change.
It is through becoming that the whole cosmos is redeemed. And
Right.
before that, nothing was becoming, right? Like
Right.
if you were talking about a before.
Yeah, it's okay. all images that are clearly symbolisms of stasis.
Right.
Like there's no change, there's no, yes.
Right. So you create the arena of becoming. You couch it in time. Right.
But yet at the same time, there still has to remain this portion of, I hate to say it, God is not composed of parts. So that we're breaking logic here, but like, let's just throw out I want to think about this, like, and not worry about the logic for a moment. There has to remain an unchanging being,
yes,
absolute portion of God for becoming to be drawn toward, in order for that process of becoming to have any
Well, he's like the conductor
meaning.
of the orchestra.
Yes.
Right? He's
well,
the
here's
conductor.
how I see it, right? It's almost like you have the infinite, you have the finite, and it's almost like the infinite is being pulled through this mediating, this small channel of the logos in via time into the finite, and that process is unfolding. It is a becoming, but at some point, I think even God will be kind of be part, like there's going to be a union between these two things.
Yeah.
That's complete.
Right.
I mean,
And I don't
oh, sorry, Michael.
I don't know what that looks like, but I think there's that's where I see that
we haven't got to that part of the book yet. We can speculate on that more fully when we get to.
But I think that's important because I think there's two things that are really important. Like, what is so precious about the here and now, right? Because I think there's something wrong in so many theologies that look forward to like some glorious thing in the future, and somehow looks past the now and how we are shaping the way that future looks.
Because the now is a foretaste of like a pure moment, like, and you can see this reflected in poetry like a lot, right? You can see it's like a really good poem will just kind of like just capture like this little snapshot of like this perfect moment, or it may not always be perfect. Sometimes it can be, but it's a moment. And actually, I would say even if it's not a beautiful moment, like the fact that it's a pure moment, even if it's a moment that's filled with pain and anguish and suffering, there's still something eternal about it.
Well, it's becoming, Nate. That's why. I mean, it's the pain and the anguish is making you. Everything is making you. And when you live in the moment, then you understand that you are being made, right? You are becoming. Like Christ didn't just appear on the scene, jump on the cross, and get it over with. He actually started out as a little cell, right? And he became in the womb, and he had to be born, and he had to grow up, and he had to go through all of the things that we do to become, right? And he had to suffer,
including death
and suffering, right? And so this is why I say, this is what redeems the cosmos. It's becoming.
Right. And we can see in this conversation why the any impulse to try to separate the human and divine natures of Christ is a mistake, because you're losing the fullness and you're losing the fullness of the picture. Like you're
well, he's no longer the lamb on the altar then.
Yeah. Well, it's satanic. It's separating Christ from the cross.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Because in some theologies that it's like there is that separation even on the cross.
Yes. Oh yeah. There were definitely there have been some heresy. Not that I'm one to like cry heresy to anybody.
I have one other question. I have to jump off at the bottom of the hour, but
no problem.
I'm curious, like he my namesake, the Archangel Michael, shows up a bunch in here. And I'm curious why he links, like anytime there's kind of like an anonymous angel, he's linking that to him. And I'm curious if you guys have any thoughts on why that is. Because I mean, in my thinking, I've always linked him to having some special relationship to Israel from basically what I've read in the book of Daniel and such. But
so he's saying because of the adjectives that are used to let you know that this isn't just an ordinary angel, that it's pointing toward it being Michael, because Michael is the only named angel in the text.
He's named in
and also he also points out, yes.
Oh, I didn't.
And he also he also points out that I think that's what he says, and I think he is. I'm pretty sure he is. You can fact check me on that, but that's my recollection. I could be wrong. I'm not 100% positive, but that's what I remember. And he's suggesting the similarity of the adjectives and the similarity of the actions. pointing toward it being Michael. We could actually read that really quick if you want. I don't think let's see here. Trying to find the section.
Yeah, it is. It's in Revelation 12 where war broke out in heaven and Michael
is named.
fought with the dragon.
Right. So yeah. So Michael's presence. So he's saying because Michael is okay. I found the portion. Let's see. The order in the composition of the apocalypse emerged already in the sixth seal when the strong angel who helped the unsealing to begin ordered a halt to destruction, which also, by the way, that to me, like, that makes me understand why there's a connection to Michael and Israel. If Michael is the angel who's like calling out for well, that's the sixth seal though, for halting the destruction. So that was in the sixth seal. Similarly, in the midst of the sounding of the sixth trumpet, the strong angel who with fire from the heavenly altar gave the signal for the beginning of the trumpet blast will resist evil through the power of the good. So basically it's like that Michael role as being the angel who like resists evil. Like that's like why he thinks that they're all references to Michael. It's because the angel is described with these adjectives that let you know that it's a special angel and not just an ordinary angel, and that his actions resemble the actions of Michael. That's his argument.
Gotcha. Well, I actually have to drop here, unfortunately.
Sure, no problem.
But
thanks for joining us, Michael.
Yeah, this has been great.
Yep.
Yeah, really good.
As good as the one we lost?
Different, totally different.
Yeah,
totally different. Totally different. I think maybe better. I'm going to go out on a limb and say better.
You're not going to sign off right away when Michael leaves, because I have a question for you.
You bet. I'll be happy to answer it. Michael,
Okay.
Thanks for joining us.
Bye, Michael.
Yep. What's your question, Shari?
Okay, so I'm just reading. I wanted to go back here and see this, and because I'm thinking about this whole becoming thing, right? And he says, at the beginning we read, behold, he cometh. At the end, the sentence is spoken significantly 3 times, Nate.
Yes, 3 times. That's right.
3 times.
Yes, 3 times.
Body,
it's almost as yes, exactly. Right. Yes. Right. No, but that's right, Shari, because it's like,
no,
yes,
I know.
It's the body, soul, and the body, soul, and spirit crying out.
Right. Right. So, and again,
for
it
union.
says here,
yes.
In order to understand the precise wording in which the theme of Christ's coming, I come quickly, is 3 times expressed in the last chapter of the book. Again, 3 times.
Yeah.
But then he says here, behold, he cometh with the clouds, and every eye shall see him, and they also which pierced him, and all kindreds of the earth shall wail because of him. Christ is pictured in the usual manner as a judge, appearing at a definite point of time, passing judgment and sentence as in a court of law. The second coming of Christ is the coming of a whole sphere. Mm-hmm. The supersensible world approaches as a whole, right? The clouds which have hitherto veiled the returning Christ will be rent asunder. So, when I read that, I thought, they also which pierced him. Like, who actually, who pierced him? Like, the supersensible world is coming in as a whole. Like, this is what I was talking about before when I said that this whole idea of becoming is what it's the thing that redeems. It's the action that redeems the whole, right? So the supersensible world suddenly at the end, when you have this perfect integration of body, soul, and spirit, and this is Christ saying, behold, I come quickly. I come, right?
Yeah.
I come.
Yeah. Right.
And then when that happens, then the supersensible world as a whole is redeemed, right? You mean
the becoming is redeemed. The supersensible world represents like the heavenly, right? So that's like the entire
right.
kingdom
So
of heaven, the entire kingdom of heaven is crashing headlong into earth.
crashing in.
There's nothing that can be done to stop that joining.
Right. So
Because
it's like you have this perfect little like sanctuary that is walled by time. Okay, this
Right.
Garden of Eden that is walled by time, and the super sensible world is out, and everything inside is becoming. Right. And when it has become, and Christ said, I'm done. I finished. It's finished. I did the work.
Right.
It's done.
Yeah, it's done.
Right. Then the walls come down and everything becomes reconciled. It's a reconciliation.
Reconciliation. That's right. That's precisely right. That's how I see it. And I've seen it that way, like for a very long time, like before I had like the before I had the like theology to like back, the theological arguments to back it up. So it's like it's like I acquired the theological arguments over time, because it's like that was my intuition for that was so strong that I literally cannot see. It's the only way reality makes sense. It's the only story. It's the only story that makes any sense to me. There is no other story that I have access to that I can make any sense of. So it's either I choose a story that has no meaning for me, or I can choose to live into this story, which I see has like the richest possible meaning.
Right.
And
well, it's a love wins story, right? It's a love story, and it's a love wins story,
yes.
And everyone is included. Nobody is excluded.
Kudos to Rob Bell, since we're quoting him.
Yeah, and
Luke will be in the comments criticizing us for not attributing that to Rob Bell. Otherwise, I remember the first time I said that. I said that in one of our videos, and it's like I had no idea who Rob Bell was, because I'm just not that connected to the evangelical culture. And it's like, if he's like plagiarizer.
I didn't know anything about him either.
Yeah, but that is a story, and because God wins. You can say God wins, love wins. You can say it either way. God wins is the story, sure. I mean, because God is love. The problem is that the problem with the other versions of the story is they forget that God is love. That's the problem.
I mean,
if God is, go ahead. Sorry.
I was 22 years old, and I asked the question of God, why did you put the knowledge of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil in the garden? Why? Right. That was the question.
Right. That's a great question.
And I kept, thinking about it. I wasn't like reading books or anything. I was just reading my Bible and praying about it. And one day I was walking across my cabin with an armload of laundry, and it was just whoosh. And I had that whole picture. And I sat down on my butt in the middle of the room in the cabin. And I was just like, I had no words to describe it. I had no way of communicating it to anyone. And that was a long time ago, let's say. And now I actually can, I still don't feel like I can say it properly, but I because of all the conversation that I've been having and the books that I've been reading, I'm able to articulate it, but not more than that, Nate. It doesn't conflict with what I saw. Nothing is conflicting with what I saw, right? That it was a reconciliation of all things.
Right.
And that we were the mediator of that reconciliation. Yes. Because we had to become something in order for that reconciliation to happen.
I remember the first time I had like a very just overwhelming sense that the reconciliation of all things is the only story that's acceptable was I asked to be able I when I was younger, I did a lot of competitive public speaking, and I was pretty good at it. And it's like when my grandfather died, it's like I asked permission to give the eulogy because I just wanted to do it. I wanted to write the speech. And I wanted to give the eulogy, and so I did. And the restoration of all things was the theme of my eulogy.
Mm.
And I can tell you, just I mean, that is it is a very powerful story. It's such a powerful story that like my atheist aunts were like absolutely in tears and told me how much they love my eulogy.
Yeah.
Right. So it's like I wonder how many people are calling themselves atheists, you know, or whatever other things, because they've been given a version of Christianity
Yeah.
that is telling them a story that is less beautiful than the full and real story.
And God is impotent in that story. Sorry.
Right.
He is. He's
Right.
impotent.
He is. Yes, exactly. Yeah. Like, yeah, evil is more powerful
Yeah.
and wins in the end. That's
Yeah.
it. I mean, that's like, it's like it's like, okay, so the story can either be that there are some human beings that are winners and some human beings are losers, and God is at best wins a Pyrrhic victory, because we know that we are told that God's desire is the restoration of all things. So that means that God is at least partially thwarted. If God desires the restoration of all things and cannot accomplish it,
Right. Right.
because we want to because we want to turn the human will into something more powerful than it is, basically. It's like it's such a backdoor idolatry,
Yes.
and such a backdoor attempt to make the human being less contingent and dependent on God than they really are, in such like a kind of in a way that's like, it's really clever.
It's
It's really clever. And what it ends up doing is like, in trying to protect like a human version of the holiness of God, it ends up creating like an ugly God in an ugly story.
well, it's the same lie that Satan told to Eve in the garden. You'll be like God.
Right.
You will be able
Right.
to choose. You'll be able to, be the you can steer your own destiny. You can make if you want to go to hell, you can. You can, right?
Right.
Like that's absurd. It's absurd. Anyway, I'm going to get into a tizzy.
Well, I also think I also think that people don't, I think like also I think I saw that you, like, was it you and Jim? I think someone had maybe, no, you weren't on yesterday, but I saw that somebody had an exchange about like the actual cost of reconciliation, and was laying down some McDonald's quotes.
Mm.
Was that you that was like sharing the McDonald quotes about how like reconciliation is actually like much more difficult
Oh
and
yeah.
much more
Well,
costly?
I didn't. I went through that chat and I didn't see them in there yesterday, so maybe it was me from the other day. But yeah, of course it is.
Because
Yeah.
reconciliation is, it really is, because there's so much more, like, if love and reconciliation are what's involved in the story, and reconciliation is required on your part, that's like that's way more that's there's way more, like,
Reconciliation requires humility, and the
yes,
scriptures tell us that Christ humbled himself, and they also tell us that he is the image of the invisible God, and if you've seen him, you've seen the Father. So what does that say?
right,
What
yeah,
does that
this is,
say?
yeah, right, exactly. Well, it means that, yeah, right, yeah, it means there's a whole lot of things that has a whole lot of implications. What it means is that what our common sense understanding of a whole bunch of concepts are completely
Mhm.
backward, because we can see
Right.
in the life, in the life and the crucifixion and death and resurrection of Christ, we can see like how like our common sense understandings of so many things are wrong.
Mhm.
And it's like, and even in his ministry, it's like, you know anyone, I mean, how many people has seriously ever have ever taken serious. Like people are always coming, even Christians, even so-called Christians. It's like they're always coming up with excuses for ignoring Christ saying, "Love your enemies."
Yeah.
Because there's no more, there's nothing more irrational or unnatural or unintuitive has ever been said than that.
Well, because for Christ, there are none, right? Like there are no enemies. He said to Judas, go do what it is you need to do. He did not defend himself before Pilate.
Right.
This is all working together for the good, right? This is what this is. And so when he says to love your enemies, essentially he's saying you don't have any. You're all brothers and sisters, right? And you need to love one another, period.
Right.
And we still want to make the distinction that we have enemies. There may be people in our lives or nations that want to destroy us, but that doesn't make them our enemy, actually. Especially not. They don't remain our enemy if we love them, right? If we really love them, they don't remain our enemy anymore. They become a brother or a sister in
well, you also
Christ.
said resist not evil by force. So if you don't resist evil by force, there's like what pathway is open to you for resisting evil? I'd say love is the only pathway.
Dying.
Right.
Which is love. But that's what love is.
Right. Right.
There's no greater love than a man lay down his life.
Self-sacrificial love is the power that creates a universe from nothing. That's
nothing.
It's the power that allows the Lamb to open the seal.
Yeah. And reveal.
And begin the cycle of begin the cycle of change for the sake of reconciliation. So I mean it's all right, Shari, that was great talk. Appreciate it.
That was really good.
Appreciate it.
Thanks.
Yep.
Yeah, me too.
Yep.
Thanks a lot, Nate.
Yep.
Bye-bye.